When I completed my last video, I felt really good about everything that went down. How I hammered in every last detail. There wasn't a single thing I forgot. Oh, wait a second. Where's Houston? No. It's all ruined. No! After 15 hours of crying in the shower, I decided that instead of moping, I should just create a video about a different type of college. A college a lot like Houston. Now you may be asking, what's so unique about Houston? Well, they're what I like to call a riser. So let's turn back the clock to the year 1960. It was a grand old time, a time where significant change was brewing. JFK got elected. Everybody was scared of communists. And Houston just left the Missouri Valley Conference to be an independent. And they had a rather odd schedule. They were going up against a lot of quality opponents, but they were scattered across the entire country. They had to go to the West Coast here, and the East Coast there. And yet, even after that massive upgrade from their Missouri Valley schedule, they actually held their own with a 6-4 record. The next 15 years would look similar. Not amazing, but not terrible, with a decent schedule. By the time they moved to the Southwest in '76, they had a few straight years of being ranked. Then, for the next 20 years, they still had a blast in the Southwest Conference, their first power conference. And here's where I say that they were only an established football team at that point for 30 years. The team was founded in 1946, and they were playing for the Southwest in '76. That's impressive. But their journey's not over yet, as they do get demoted when the Southwest split in 1995. And Houston joined the Conference USA in the aftermath of that event. They jumped ships to the American in 2013, and now they are having their very first year in the Big 12. Their second time jumping from non-power status to power status. And even if you consider them a power school while they were independent, as they were playing a very high quality schedule, their history was still very impressive, as in the span of their less than 80-year history, they went from a group of 5 team to a power team twice. They literally grew from nothing and are now a power school, earning them the number 6 spot on my list. What list, you may ask? A list of 13 total schools that came from nothing and are now something. In fact, they're now Power 5 schools. Think of this as the polar opposite to my last list, when before we were discussing schools that were significantly demoted. Now, we're going to discuss schools that had the best promotions. Stay tuned and see if your school came from nothing and is now something. Now I have a couple of criteria for this list. I'm not really going to go that far before 1960 for the sake of keeping everything somewhat modern. I'm looking at every school that made the jump from Group of 5 to Power 5 1960 or later and is still a Power 5 school today. So if your school was a Power 5 the entire time from 1960 until now, then they're not on this list, even if they made a significant jump before then. And 2, these schools I decided to rank, I tried to sort them by how fast they grew and from how low of a conference they came from. These schools are ranked in order, but don't really take these rankings too seriously, as every single one of these schools has made an incredible journey. And a lot of these schools can easily be switched around. Now let's stop wasting time and get on with it. Here is my honorable mention, starting with SMU. SMU is an honorable mention because I really went in depth with them in the last video if you want to watch that. And 2, SMU was in a power conference up until 1995 and is rejoining one next year, being regulated to 3 Group of 5 conferences, the WAC, Conference USA, and American, for a total less than 30 years. If you want to know why they were deregulated in the first place, then watch that video here. The other honorable mention is TCU, who jumped between a ton of conferences. I know I discussed them a little bit in my previous video, but I'll give them a little more love here, as I only briefly discuss what happened after the Southwest split. They were in the Southwest for most of recorded history, but when the Southwest split, they jumped to the WAC, had a 10-2 season, and switched to Conference USA for 4 years. They weren't amazing there, but they still managed to jump to the Mountain West Conference. It was there that they had 3 straight seasons in the top 10 and got invited to the Big 12 where they are today. Now taking my number 11 spot is the Rutgers. They were an interesting option for me, as before the year 1990, they were an independent for a very long time. And by looking at their schedule from 1973, I made the assumption that they were not a power team as an independent, as they had games against only a few teams that were in major conferences at that time. After 1990, they joined the Big East, their very first power conference, and when that ship sank, they, along with many of their Big East friends, formed the American Conference. And they did enjoy 1 year there, before sagging on to the Big Ten, where they are today. Now, one thing to note is that these stories will get much more interesting as I go up the list. I mean, there's a reason that these schools are outside the top 10. Now cracking my top 10 is a tie between Arizona and Arizona State at number 9. The reason why they are together is that their journey is almost identical. This such journey starts in the mysterious Border Conference, where they jumped ship around my 1960 cutoff. I have no idea why every single school on this list decided to move in 1960, but they did. Once the Border Conference was in both of their rearview mirrors, they joined the WAC, which is a conference I don't consider to be a power conference, but they're probably the closest a conference could get at its height. They had institutions like the Arizona schools and other schools I'll disclose later in this list. But they also had the likes of UTEP, New Mexico, Wyoming, and Colorado State, which are clearly not major schools. So that's why I bumped them back. Anyway, any question of the WAC being a power conference was out the window when both schools left for the Pac-10 in the late 70s. It's nice to know that even then, they still do come in a package, like they do today. Number 8 is BYU. Now, the story of this school started with a Skyline Conference in the year 1961, BYU's last year there. This conference contained the likes of Utah, Colorado State, and New Mexico. But they left with BYU to the WAC, the same WAC I mentioned earlier, with the Arizona schools. For a while, everyone lived happily here before the Arizona schools jumped ship to what was then called the Pac-10. Then, for a while, everyone continued to chill until the late 90s, when BYU, along with Utah, Wyoming, Air Force, and Colorado State, decided to form a new conference called the Mountain West. They left mainly because of travel concerns at that time, as the WAC stretched from Hawaii all the way to Oklahoma. Wait until they saw the most recent conference realignment. Afterwards, Utah and BYU both were in the Mountain West until Utah got an invite to the Pac-12 and BYU didn't. Essentially, the Pac-12 was a little picky with who they wanted in. So when Utah and BYU popped up, they chose Utah, but declined with BYU because, well, it didn't fit with their values. Ouch. This attitude that the Pac-12 snobs had would eventually lead to their downfall. And it also solidifies Utah at the number 7 spot, having the edge over BYU because they officially became a power conference a decade earlier. And BYU, they were independent for the next 10 years. That one school wasn't exactly a Power 5 school, but had the schedule of one, at least in football. BYU would officially join the Big 12 in 2023, giving them a spot on this list. Houston has the number 6 spot, so just a final reminder of that. Now we crack the top 5 with West Virginia, the Mountain Mama. So running back the clock to 1960, they were in the Southern Conference, chilling with buddies like VMI, Furman, and William & Mary. Then in 1967, they decided that they had enough and became independents. And as an independent, they handled a rather tough schedule, one that was surely Power 5 caliber for the most parts. So when they rejoined a conference in 1990, they rejoined the Big East. Although I did have sources say that they were in the A10, but no, I guess not. Those sources were wrong. So I'll just say that they were independents between 1968 and 1990. After switching to the Big East, they were finally in a power conference. So when that version of the Big East disbanded in 2012, they went straight to the Big 12 where they are today. Number 4 is Virginia Tech, who in 1960 enjoyed their days in the Southern Conference too. One thing to note is that in the early 1900s, the Southern was a powerhouse. But that didn't last, as like West Virginia before them, they weren't enjoying the greatest competition there, and left in 1964 to go that independent route. They probably gave West Virginia the idea of leaving. They weren't independent for a while, as like West Virginia before them, they joined the Big East in 1990. However, they wouldn't stay until the Big East split, like everyone else, and opted to join the ACC in 2004, with Miami and Boston College, where they are today. They get the nod over West Virginia because I say so, although you could really flip them back and forth. Number 3 is Cincinnati, another back and forth college. In 1960, they were in the Missouri Valley Conference, a common jump-in-between point for many colleges. Links to their own special video is on the screen somewhere. And it was during that year that they went 4-6. Not great. Let's see how they do a little later. They stayed here for a few more years, finally leaving in 1969 to become independent, where they played the likes of Miami, both Miamis, Penn State, Memphis, and Temple, so they had a decent slate. Now eventually, the lure of conferences attracted them, and in the year 1996, they joined the Conference USA. In this conference, they had an absolute blast, and left only 8 years later in 2004 to join the Big East. For themselves, only lasted another 8 years. After that, they went to where almost every other Big East refugee went, the American. Once there, they were there for yet another 8 years, where they joined the newly formed Big 8 and played only 8-man football for 8 games a year. No, not really. They were actually in the American for 10 years, breaking their 8-year cycle. And now, they reside in the Big 12, so that's it. Number 2 is the Louisville Cardinals. Once upon a time, they were independent before deciding to join the Missouri Valley in 1962. Once there, they thrived in their conference setting for the next 12 years. At that point, they were like, screw that, I'm being independent again. And then they became independent again. And as the years drew on by, many thought that they would never join a conference again. But alas, in the 90s, they were like, screw that, I'm joining a conference. And join a conference they did, but not any conference. The Conference USA. They stayed there for 8 years and was then beckoned away to the Big East with Cincinnati, where, with them, they chilled for 8 years. Finally, when the Big East collapsed, the American rose from the ashes. 1 year later, Louisville decided that they didn't like that, and they joined the ACC, where they lived happily ever after to this day. Now, before I go to my number 1 spot, like and subscribe. Help this young channel out, and if you happen to notice a glaring issue with this video, let me know how I can improve so I can continue to optimize and give you, the viewer, the best possible experience. Also, engage in the comments to build a community here. Now on to our number 1 team, UCF. It wasn't really that close. Why? Because in the year 1960, that football team didn't even exist. In fact, the football team wasn't even established until 1979. This football team is the youngest major program in the NCAA by far, and it's not even close. In 1979, the presidents established the program to essentially bring the university greater renown. They played in Division III ball for 3 whole years before jumping to Division II, where they played in Division II for another 8 years, until they moved to the FCS in 1989. There, they were an FCS independent until 1995, where they jumped to the FBS. That's right, this school, that is now a Power 5 institution, wasn't even an FBS school in the mid-90s. But the journey doesn't end there, as they would join their first conference in 2001. Their first conference is the MAC, which made absolutely no sense, as the MAC is a conference almost exclusively in Ohio and Michigan. They saw this too, and made the proper move to Conference USA in 2004. It was here that they would have their first ranked season in 2010. After that, they decided to move to the American after the Big East fell. They would relish their time there, being ranked as high as 10th in the nation in their first year. After that, they would proceed to be absolutely terrible for a couple of years, before making a quick turnaround and being undefeated in 2017, and even being Auburn in the Peach Bowl. The College Football Playoff Committee would receive a lot of flack for placing them outside of the playoffs. And now, the Knights claim a national championship that year, even though not a lot of people recognize that. After a couple of really good years, they would make their way to the Big 12 in 2023, finally ending the relatively short journey from literal nothingness to being a Power 5 program today. And now, that's it. Here's the map for this video showing all of the teams mentioned here today. The link to the download is in the description. Thank you very much and stay crispy.